A good year. That's how we say in Yiddish. A good year. We wish each other a good year. In Hebrew, we say Shana Tova. We've just come out of Rosh Hashanah. We also wish each other that it should be a sweet year. Why? That it should be both good and sweet. Because many times things that are good for us are pretty painful when they're happening. We only realize later it was good for us. But what we wish for each other is that the coming year should be good and it should feel good while it's happening. In other words, that it should be sweet. We also wish each other during these 10 days of awe between Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, when our judgment for the coming year is suspended, it's in the air, right? We've come before the heavenly throne. Our souls are before the heavenly court right now, and we're going to receive a decree for the coming year. But it's like the trial is happening right now, so that we wish each other that we should get a good decree for the year, and it should be a good seal on a good decree. That's what we pray for ourselves and for each other. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? I missed you during the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Thank God we're back together. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us for this first AT Daily of the new year? This is 5781, the Hebrew year 5781, 5,781 years since the world was created. James Roth says Shalom from Indianapolis. Sharon Frant Brooks says Gamar Hatima Tova from Lebanon, New Jersey. Melissa Itel Jurin Shana Tova from Great Neck, New York. Kelly Meadows, Valley View near Cleveland, Ohio. Fran Sophia Lauren Best Pest says is with us from Tucson, Arizona. Patsy Nichols says Patsy's with us from Corey, Pennsylvania. Harold Black says happy 5781 from Loretta and Harold in Oregon. Carol Smo says Shana Tova from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Arnold Albin is wishing for you a beautiful and sweet new year with health, peace, and blessings. Kevin Gale Brockett says Shalom and good morning from Israel. He's already with us in Israel. It's a new day over there. He's watching the sun come up over Jordan. Paul Kunis says Shalom and Gemara Timatova from Minneapolis. Selwyn Gerber says Shana Tova and blessings for a good seal on our year, good decree. Lawrence Polineski says hello. Larry from Queens. Stephanie Marie Diaz is saying Shavua Tov, a good week. We were also coming out of Shabbos. Of course, Rosh Hashanah, the first day was on Shabbos. Miriam Jacob is with us from Hayden, Colorado. Christine Rock from Oregon. Faina Buchinskaya from Los Angeles. Lisa Mullins-Adamski from blessings from Central Florida. And Kristen Wachowski is with us from La Conner, Washington. And Sela Chetrit from Aventura, Florida. Over on the YouTube side, and nobody has commented yet. All right. Tonight's class is dedicated by Diane Yeris to the memory of Adrian Mantis. May Adrian's memory always be for a blessing. May her soul be bound up in the cords of eternal life. And since we're dedicating our learning tonight to her, may our learning, push her soul just up 1 degree further in the world of souls, a little bit closer to the heavenly throne. All right. Another one of these lovely coincidences we were talking about, even though we're studying the laws of the Erev, the Shabbos boundary, how far one can walk on Shabbos and how we establish that or even move it. Just before Rosh Hashanah, we were discussing Rosh Hashanah, and we had a beautiful digression on whether or not we say Shechechianu, the blessing of the time, when we say, thank you, God, for allowing us to reach this moment in time. Thank you, God, that we're still alive. Thank you, God, that we're able to celebrate this holiday and to celebrate it with loved ones. God willing, we had that opportunity. So we say Shechechianu, and we learn that we say Shechechianu on both days of Rosh Hashanah, even though it's one period of holiness. We do make that distinction and say Shechechianu on both days, and that's what we did. We said Shechechianu on both days of Rosh Hashanah, and it was a little bit complicated when we said it on Saturday night, right? Because we were ending Shabbos, and normally we would make Havdalah, and we would bless God for distinguishing between sacred and profane, sacred and the regular days of the week, the holiness of Shabbos and the regular days of the week. We say that every week when Shabbos ends. But here we were made a blessing that God separates between holy and holy, the holiness of Shabbos from the holiness of Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah continued on Sunday. So that question that we saw right on Friday as we were entering Rosh Hashanah that happened to fall out on this daf in our journey through the Talmud, our 7.5-year journey, it happened to fall out right on Rosh Hashanah. And in today's daf, we'll touch on the subject of fasting. And that's also a nice coincidence because tomorrow we'll observe Tzom Gedalia. It's not a major fast, it's a minor fast. So we're able to eat tonight. We could even eat tomorrow morning if we get up before sunrise. But during the daylight hours, we will be observing the fast of Gedalia. And we'll touch a little bit on fasting in our daf. Okay, so where are we? This is episode number 259 of AT Daily. We're in Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. This is Daf Mem Aleph, page 41. We're going to complete our discussion of the 10th Mishna of chapter 3. And in fact, we're going to complete our discussion of chapter 3. And we're going to open chapter 4 with the first Mishna of chapter 4. So, this question of whether we say Shechechianu on Rosh Hashanah, on both days of Rosh Hashanah, it was a question that the sage Rabba, the Babylonian sage Rabba, asked during his student days when he was a student of Rav Huna. We already had the answer to that. And then the daf continues, the page continues, and it says that Rabba also asked Rav Huna, when he was a student of Rav Huna, do we complete a voluntary fast to somebody who's undertaken a fast that is voluntary and it happened to fall out on Friday? Does he complete that fast, or meaning he doesn't eat all the way until it becomes dark on Friday? Why is this a question? He made a vow. He undertook a fast for whatever reason. There was something in his life going on, and he said, I'm going to take on a fast as an offering, right? Like this is after the temple has been destroyed, and you can take on a fast as a kind of a voluntary offering. It's like a sacrifice that you make. You're giving up the food that you would have eaten that day to try to, make a stronger prayer to God for whatever it is that you're praying for. We won't go into the laws of voluntary fast. The issue is what he took on a voluntary fast. But it fell out on Friday. It might have been a series of fasts, that it's going to be like over a few days or a few weeks. It might have been that something was going on in the community and the community leaders decreed a fast or a series of fasts. So the fast fell out on a Friday. The question is, do we complete that fast, or do we finish the fast while it's still daytime, even though we vowed to fast a whole day? But maybe we want to end the fast before Friday ends. Why? So that we don't enter Shabbos and we don't fast on Shabbos. The only time we fast on Shabbos is when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos. But otherwise, for example, we're going to talk about this, Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. The Hebrew month of Av usually falls out around August. This is a terrible date in history. We spoke about it some weeks ago. When so many calamities happen in Jewish history, it's the only other major fast, just like Yom Kippur. It's a 25-hour fast. When we recall the destruction of both temples, the first and second temple, which happened on the same day, also the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the beginning of World War I, which initiated the whole disaster of the 20th century that eventually led to World War II and the Holocaust, etc. So if Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, well, that's how we're going to analyze this question. The point is, do we end that fast before Shabbos begins because we don't want to enter Shabbos in a state of affliction, right? And we don't want to enter Shabbos in a state of affliction. So that's the question that Rabba is asking Rav Huna. Do we cancel, or not cancel, but end the fast a little early on Friday so that we don't enter Shabbos while we're still fasting, right? And only take our first food when we're in Shabbos. Do we have a little bit of food at the end of daylight on Friday so that we don't enter Shabbos in a state of affliction? That's what Rabba asked Rav Huna when Rabba was Rav Huna's student. And Rav Huna didn't know the answer. He says, I'm not sure. He didn't have an answer ready at hand. So Rabba brought the question to Rav Yehuda, another great sage of that time and place. Rav Yehuda did not know the answer. The question came before Rava. Rava didn't have the answer either, but he said, let's analyze the sources and see if we can figure out whether or not this voluntary fast that one undertook on a Friday, whether he should complete it or not, because if you undertake a fast, it's like you've made a vow not to eat that day. So we don't cancel a vow lightly. We don't tell him to finish that lightly. So let's analyze the sources and see. So the first question that we're going to look at, the first case that we're going to look at to try and understand whether we should finish that fast or not on Friday is the case of Tisha B'Av, right? So Tisha B'Av is a major fast. We fast for 25 hours. It always comes out in the summer, and it's a very long daylight period, at least in the northern hemisphere, and that makes it a tough fast. It's 25 hours either way, but because you have to wait till so long before it gets dark so late in the summer, it just really feels like a long fast. Okay, so if Tisha B'Av falls out on Saturday, we don't fast on Shabbos. So if Tisha B'Av falls out on a Saturday, it's observed on Sunday. So whether Tisha B'Av falls on a Saturday or a Sunday, it's observed on Sunday. So once it's being observed on Sunday, the question is, do we stop eating a little bit before the end of Shabbos because we're entering that fast? I mean, you're going to try to have your final meal before you start the fast of Tisha B'Av, as late in the day as possible, but it has to be while it's still daytime of the day before, or you're not fasting on Tisha B'Av. So you're gonna undertake to be fasting a little bit before the end of the previous day, Erev Tisha B'Av, the 8th of the month of Av, right? Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av. On the 8th of Av, or on the 9th, if it got pushed over to Sunday because it fell out on a Saturday, you're gonna have to stop eating a little bit before daylight ends on the day before Tisha B'Av. If it's being observed on Sunday or if it falls on Sunday, that means you're going to stop eating a little bit before the end of Shabbos. That's a problem because technically you're already fasting and we don't fast on Shabbos. But you have to stop eating at some point, right? And you can't eat you can't be eating as the new day starts or you're not fasting on Tisha B'Av. So of course you're going to eat that last meal on Shabbos late, but then you stop eating. So there is going to be a little bit of a period toward the end of Shabbos when technically your fast has begun. You're just not eating because you're not eating anymore on Shabbos, but technically your fast for Tisha B'Av has begun. So, in a sense, you're already fasting on Shabbos. So we began the fast at the end of Shabbos. If Tisha B'Av falls on Friday, right? So now Tisha B'Av falls on Friday. So now it's the same question, except it's not a voluntary fast, it's an obligatory fast, right? This is a major fast. It could fall out on a Friday. So do we complete the fast, which means that we're going to enter Shabbos in this state of affliction? Or do we end the fast, while near the end of that period, very near the end, but while it's still daylight? So there was an incident where Rabbi Akiva, in front of his students, where Tisha B'Av fell out on Friday. They'd been fasting since the night before. Shabbos was coming, but had not arrived yet. Twilight had not arrived yet. It was still clearly daylight. And Rabbi Akiva ate an egg in front of his students. In other words, ending his Tisha B'Av fast while it was still daytime. And his students said it wasn't that he was so hungry and desperate to eat and it was unhealthy for him. And, if your life is at stake, if your health is at stake, yeah, you cancel a fast, of course, always, even on Yom Kippur. But it wasn't that situation for Rabbi Akiva. It was that he was observing the law that we're going to end Tisha B'Av early so we don't enter Shabbos in a state of affliction. That's what Rabbi Akiva did. Some say Rabbi Akiva did not want to do that, but he submitted to the ruling authority in his time, the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, who was Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel held that when Tisha B'Av falls on Friday, even Tisha B'Av, you end that fast early to honor Shabbos, and so you don't enter Shabbos in a state of affliction. Rabbi Yosei disagreed with that ruling. He said, no, you got to complete that fast. And just as we stop eating at the end of Shabbos, when we're going to observe Tisha B'Av on a Sunday, and so we're fasting a little piece of Shabbos at the end of Shabbos, so too we could be fasting just a little piece of Shabbos at the beginning of Shabbos. It's the same thing. It's just technically we're fasting a little bit on Shabbos, but it's the same as fasting a little bit at the end of Shabbos when Tisha B'Av falls out on Sunday. And the rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Yosei, and they said it's not the same. It's not the same at all, because if you've had 3 beautiful meals on Shabbos, you're not even hungry. You're not even thinking about the fact that you're technically begun your fast at the end of Saturday. But if you've been fasting since Thursday night, you didn't eat anything all of Friday, and now you're going to complete that fast and enter Shabbos, and for a few minutes at least while after Shabbos has begun, maybe not until after Friday night prayers, so maybe for a whole other hour or two until you get to Shabbos dinner, you're going to really feel the affliction of that fast, and that, counteracts and contradicts and conflicts with the joy of Shabbos. So we should not complete that Tisha B'Av fast that falls on a Friday, say the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yosei, namely Rabban Gamliel, who says we do not complete that fast. However, Ula, the sage Ula, who traveled a lot between Israel and Babylonia, the two Jewish communities, and really was very, he was a good resource of knowing what the law is, and everybody relied on him because he also had a big brain, a good memory. And Ula said, no, the law accords with Rabbi Yosei. You do complete that fast. Even though you're going to enter Shabbos in a state of affliction, you do complete that fast, says Ula. And he says the law accords with Rabbi Yosei. Rabban Gamliel says we don't. And that's why Rabbi Akiva ate that egg. When Rabban Gamliel died, Rabbi Yehoshua entered the study hall and said, I'm going to make a decree, I'm going to announce it out loud, that now that Rabban Gamliel has left this world and we honor him for all the work and the good work that he did, but since we disagree with him on this issue, that he said we should cancel the Tisha B'Av fast early so that we don't enter Shabbos in a state of affliction, and we disagree with him and we think Tisha B'Av is a major fast and we have to complete that fast, So I'm going to announce that now that he's gone, the law is going to go back to the way that it should be, which is that we do complete the fast. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, no, Rabbi Yehoshua, you're not going to announce that. Now that Rabban Gamliel has passed, we are going to honor him by recalling that the halacha, the law, was established by him. This is the law of the previous generation. The previous generation is closer to Mount Sinai than we are to the revelation at Mount Sinai. So they have a better grasp and a better understanding of what the law is. And we don't change laws that they established. And nobody objected to what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said. And so it seemed like Rabban Gamliel said, we cancel that fast a little early on Friday, before the end of Friday, so we don't enter Shabbos in a state of affliction, and that's going to be the law. And so Rabbi Akiva, when he ate that egg late in the day, it might have been while Rabban Gamliel was alive. It might have even been after Rabban Gamliel passed, because it seems like the law got established according to Rabban Gamliel. However, we see that pretty soon afterward, I don't know how many years, was it a full generation or what, but the law did revert back. I guess there was so much prevailing opinion among the sages that no, Rabbi Yosei is right. Rabbi Yehoshua, who's a towering light himself, said that the law should be this way. And so the law did actually change to what apparently was intended to be from the beginning. It was just that Rabban Gamliel tried to change it. But I guess even earlier sages had said, no, we complete that fast. And of course, when they're talking about, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva, they saw the fall of the second temple. So, that 9th of Av was really strong among these sages. Maybe Rabban Gamliel said, well, I lived through that. And I'm telling you that still the joy of Shabbos should be greater. But in fact, the law was established as we complete that fast, right? We complete the fast of Tisha B'Av, even when it falls on a Friday. And not only that, but that's an obligatory fast, but even for a voluntary fast, we complete that fast as well. Unless a person who undertakes a voluntary fast says, I'm gonna fast, but if this runs up against Shabbos, I'm gonna end it early. A person can do that. They can make that declaration. It's a voluntary fast after all, and then they could end it early so that it wouldn't conflict with Shabbos, more in the spirit of Rabban Gamliel's ruling. That's the end of chapter 3. Now we enter chapter 4. Chapter 3 was all about the requirements of the Eruv. As we saw, there's a few definitions of the word Eruv, both the joining of courtyards, for example, so a boundary, an enclosure of holiness within which we can carry on Shabbos, is permitted to carry on Shabbos, or joining or moving the boundary because of the techum, the limit, how far I can walk on Shabbos. I can only walk 2,000 cubits away from the city limits, or if I'm outside a city, 2,000 cubits away from my dwelling. And we saw that I might want to move my Shabbos dwelling because I want to go more than 2,000 cubits in one direction. And how do we do that? How do we move our Shabbos dwelling? By planting a basket of food that has enough, we saw what were the requirements of that basket. It had to be enough food for 2 meals, or at least the value of 2 meals. It had to be available. Even if I can't eat it, somebody's got to eat it. Can I access that basket? I have to be able to access it from when Shabbos begins, or somebody has to be able to access it. Those are the rules we discussed in chapter 3. Now in chapter 4, we're going to talk about, well, what happens if somebody's forced out of his Shabbos boundary? He can only walk 2,000 cubits in one direction, but what if he ends up outside that boundary? What happens then? Or what about somebody who has no Shabbos dwelling? For example, a traveler, what do we do for him, and what are his limits? How far can he walk on Shabbos? These are the kinds of questions we will be examining in chapter 4. Let's open our first Mishnah. This is very colorful Mishnah. This is going to be a lot of fun. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. I'll get to them at the end. If this is your first time watching, please let us know that it's your first time watching so that we can welcome you. Nina will be feeding me the questions and comments, and I'll get to them toward the end, which won't be that much longer. Okay, the first Mishna of chapter 4, one who was forced out of his Shabbos boundary, out of his techum, right, out of his Erev techum, out of the boundary of how far he can walk on Shabbos. Something, an external force, pushed him outside that boundary. How do we deal with that situation? First, the question is, well, what do you mean he was forced out? What forced him out? So, one who was forced out of his Shabbos boundary by idolaters, right? So non-Jews, at that time most non-Jews were idolaters, or an evil spirit. We'll talk about that in a moment. So somebody was forced out of his boundary against his will, either by idolaters or an evil spirit. Once he's outside his boundary, how far can he walk? Answer, 4 cubits. He has only his 4 cubits. So he could have walked, as much as 4,000 cubits when he was in his boundary, right? Because he could go, 2,000 to his dwelling if he started outside his dwelling, because he established that Erev 2,000 cubits away, plus another 2,000 cubits, right? That's a big distance that he could have had. He could have walked, 4,000 cubits, it's a good mile. But now that he's outside his boundary, he basically has to stay where he is. The 4 cubits that you inhabit, it's about 6 feet. Like, you just got to stay where you are and wait till Shabbos ends, and then you can go on about your business, right? You're forced out of your boundary. Now you're no longer free to walk around. You have to stay where you are. However, if that force that pushed him out of his boundary puts him back inside his boundary, the idolaters or the evil spirit that moved him out, now he regains his whole Sabbath boundary, and then he can walk anywhere that he could have walked as if he had not been taken outside of it, right? If it was against his will he was taken out, and against his will he was put back, now he regains the full use of his boundary. If that force that took him out of his boundary dropped him in another city, then he's in luck, because now he can walk all around that city. What he can't do is leave that city. Previously, if you're in a city for Shabbos, your boundary is 2,000 cubits from the city limits. So this person who got against his will on Shabbos dropped in another city, he can't go more than 4 cubits outside the city limits, but he can walk all around the city. That is according to the opinion of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. However, Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva say, even though he got dropped in a city and normally we can walk all around the city on Shabbos, this person who was moved against his will out of his original boundary has to sit in his 4 cubits. He's got to wait for Shabbos to end in the spot where they put him. And how do we know that these rabbis feel that way? Based on a real incident that happened, they were all embarking on a ship together. In the old days especially, ships didn't leave on such a, predetermined schedule. They couldn't they would have picked a ship that wouldn't leave on Shabbos if they had a choice, for sure. But they needed to get somewhere. The ship was going, and it was like the ship tells them, well, just stay near because we're going to leave as soon as our, water and cargo is all on board and some VIP or whatever. And, the ship was finally ready to sail and sailed on Shabbos, right? So now so on Shabbos, they began Shabbos in that port. Then the ship moved away from the port, much more than 2,000 cubits away from that port. So what is their Shabbos dwelling? Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say, well, we can move all around the ship. We can't leave the ship. How would you leave the ship anyway? But you can't. But maybe another boat would come along and say, oh, come on our boat. They couldn't do that. But they can move all around the ship. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehoshua were more machmir. They were more stringent with themselves. And they said, now that we've been removed from the Shabbos boundary that we had when Shabbos began, it happened against our will, right? The people who run this ship, they're obviously not Jews, or they wouldn't have sailed on Shabbos. So they moved us out of our boundary. And so we accept on ourselves to just sit in our own 4 cubits. In other words, they probably had a cabin on the ship, and they just stayed in the cabin and didn't leave the cabin until Shabbos ended. Later in the same voyage, they arrived at a port on Shabbos, or right as Shabbos was coming in. They arrived Friday evening. So if they had arrived after Shabbos began, they weren't in that city before, so it would be a question, can they walk around the city? Presumably Rabban Gamliel and Elazar ben Azariah would say, yeah, now we got dropped off in this city, so we can move around the city. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehoshua would have sat on the boat until Shabbos ended. However, the ship entered the city. Rabban Gamliel told his friends, he said, actually, I was watching closely, and we reached the port before twilight, before Shabbos began. For sure, it was still Friday when we reached the port. So our Shabbos boundary was established, not just the ship when we were out at sea. Our Shabbos boundary that we created with our feet, essentially by being here when Shabbos began, is this city where we have docked. So even you, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehoshua, who are more strict with yourselves than Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and I, you too can move all around the city, and that's what they did. The Gemara opens the discussion of this Mishnah by looking at this question of, who forced us to do something against our will, moved us out of our Sabbath boundary. And it says, 3 things make a person act against their will and against the will of God. Before we even get into those 3 things, it's amazing that this falls out today, that we're studying it just as we're coming out of Rosh Hashanah. In fact, we're studying it now, but this was the page that came out during Rosh Hashanah. Because what did we pray for on Rosh Hashanah? We crown God as our king. Rosh Hashanah is all about making God sovereign in our lives. Rosh Hashanah is all about saying, God, please help me, strengthen me to make my will your will. Now, why would we say that? It's so subservient. Well, being subservient to God is not like being subservient to any human. Being subservient to God means you created me. You created me for a reason. You created my soul in the world of souls. And then you sent me into this world for a mission. I have a mission in this world. I forgot everything that I knew when I lived in the world of souls, and my whole life is spent trying to remember what my mission is and to fulfill it. And so please, God, strengthen me to submit to your will, to figure out why you sent me here, so that I can blossom as a human being who's fulfilling his purpose in this world. Being subservient to God is the greatest freedom that there is. Now, when we do things that we know God doesn't want us to do, like when we sin, what is a sin? A sin is nothing more, nothing less than violating God's will. It's doing something that God told us, don't do that, and we go ahead and do it anyway. Why would we do that? Why would we violate the will of our Maker, who only wants what's good for us? Why would we do that? Because either we were forced to by an idolater, meaning somebody who rejects the will of God. That's the definition of an idolater. So somebody who's already rejected the will of God wants us to reject the will of God too, because then they feel better about themselves. Or an evil spirit entered into me, or I am wallowing in the depths of poverty. Right? When we're so impoverished that we don't know where our next meal is coming from, we don't know where shelter is coming from, we can't care for our loved ones, then all the time things are going to happen that we wouldn't do otherwise, but it forces us to do things against our own will and against the will of God. What is this evil spirit? An evil spirit, now Obviously we could do a whole class on what are evil spirits. But for now, let's just suffice it to say that in the Jewish worldview, what are evil spirits? Number one, this is not going to have an exact definition, right? There's going to be a lot of different approaches to what evil spirits are. One is that it's the evil inclination, meaning the inclination of the body. The soul is a very, very ultra refined, eternal, spiritual being that wants nothing more than to reunite with God. The body is an animal body that wants what it wants, and it wants it now. It's hungry, it's sexual, it's selfish, it's all about me, 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 me. So one idea is that the evil spirit is following the evil inclination of the body, the bodily appetites and not all many bodily appetites are super healthy and it's wonderful. The body is a creation of God also, and it's fantastic. But sometimes we find ourselves pulled between our evil inclination and our good inclination. Evil spirits can also be actual spirits. One teaching is that evil spirits are created when we sin, right? Every time we commit a sin in this world, it's like we sort of give life to the other side, to the Sitra Achra. Now, what evil spirits are not is demons employed by Satan. That is not a Jewish view, right? So Satan is an angel who works for God, does not violate the will of God. Satan is a prosecutor. He's like the prosecutor in the court system, in the heavenly court, and he's the accuser. Satan's job, he's against us, but he's not against God. He's saying, look at your creatures, they're not doing so good. Look at this one, you should punish this one. Look at all the things that he did. And he even will tempt us to do bad in order to show God that, we're phonies when we're trying to act and do good. So that's how that, the role of Satan sort of got transmogrified a little bit in the culture and by other religions. But in the Jewish understanding, he's a servant of God and a messenger of God. Evil spirits are something else. Evil spirits are of this world. They're invisible here. And the Talmud even teaches that if we had the eyes to see, we would just sit in terror all the time because evil spirits are all around us. Makes sense. If they're created when humans sin, well, humans have sinned a lot in human history, so they're all around. And it's sort of like just as one sin pulls us to another sin, like once, right? They say that the initial attraction of sin is as thin as a spider's thread. Yet if you give into it, then the next sin comes a little easier and the attraction to that sin is a little stronger. And eventually, when we keep giving in to our sinful temptations, the attraction to sin becomes like a cart rope, like a thick rope. And it's so hard to break that addiction to sin. And that's why, of course, we try to avoid sin from the beginning. We try to avoid getting addicted to sins. At any rate, that's one understanding of what evil spirits are. And it's like they can get us to act against our will and against the will of God. And the third is the depths of poverty. Now, why? Then the Gemara asks, so what is the point of saying these three things? That these three things pull a person against their own will and the will of God. So what do we learn from that? What's the point? The point is that when you see somebody being forced to do things that they'd rather not do, and that includes like by an evil spirit, right? So it's not like there's some, little devil prodding him along. It's a person just sinning. But you should think to yourself, oh man, please God help that guy. Have mercy on that guy. We should have mercy in our hearts. We should pray for people that are acting against their own will. We don't know why they're behaving badly. Maybe they're being forced to do it by actual humans who are forcing them to do it, coercing them to behave that way. Or maybe they become subject to the pull of sin and the pull of these evil spirits. Or maybe they're so impoverished that they would never behave that way otherwise. But God forbid we would be in those same straits of poverty. We might behave that way too. So we should arouse our mercy toward that person and pray for them. Okay. The Gemara also mentions 3 people will never see the face of Gehenna. So what is Gehenna? Gehenna, the way in the popular culture, the word for that would be like, what is it called? Not hell. Oh, what's that word? The place that you go to temporarily. That's what Gehenna is, okay? I'm spacing on that word. It's not a Jewish word. The word in Judaism is Gehenna, right? So Gehenna is a place of fire and pain and punishment, but it's temporary. You go there to be refined, right? So a person who has a place in the world to come, but is still carrying a bunch of sins with them, okay, so they're going to be punished in the next life, in the world to come, the hereafter, after they die and leave this world. But our sages teach that at the most it'll be 11 months that they'll spend there. Who knows what it'll seem like? But it's like they'll get, they'll get cleaned of those sins, as it were. They'll get refined so that the soul can sort of leave the dredges of the sins and all that awful behavior of the human life behind and rejoin, its loved ones and its family and God in that higher world. But some people won't ever even need, whatever 1 or 11 or some months of refinement in that next world. These 3 will never need that. Who are they? People who suffer extreme poverty, people who suffer from intestinal disease, meaning physical conditions that are so painful in this world. And this is hilarious. Those who are oppressed by creditors, okay? So like if you've got, and imagine the ancient world, right? These days, credit card companies, it's bad, it's tough. You got yourself into debt, now you're being harassed by credit card companies. It's not like the burning fires of hell, right? But in the old days, right, if you owed money and you couldn't pay it, those creditors could put you in prison and let you languish in prison your whole life until somebody out there steps up and pays your debt. So it's like that kind of thing. And some say an evil spouse, right? Like if you're married to somebody who's just awful and you have to live with that person for years and years, in all these cases, you've suffered enough, right? Like this kind of suffering during your life is so intense that you won't have to suffer when you leave this world. It's like your soul was already cleaned by the afflictions that you endured in this life. So what is the takeaway? So, that if God forbid you find yourself in extreme poverty or suffering, chronic extreme pain that goes on for years, or that you're hounded, by terrible debts and creditors and like so harassing that you can't live your life, or God forbid you end up married to a really awful person that makes your life a living hell. So our sages are saying, well, take it as the afflictions of love, meaning God is actually doing you a favor. When you leave this world, you're all set. You got a ticket straight to the upper world, upper chambers. You've already done your refining. You've been cleaned through the suffering that you experienced here. Having taught 2 teachings of, 3 people, 3 things can cause us to violate our own will and the will of God. 3 people will never see Gehenna. The Gemara adds one more teaching, a set of 3. And it says that 3 people can die within a conversation, meaning you can be talking to a person like everything's normal, and they could just drop dead. So 3 conditions to be careful about, because you could just be living your life, and these conditions could cause you to drop dead. One is intestinal sickness. So again, these are categories. So it's like people who have internal diseases. Obviously, the medical systems that we have now, they couldn't have imagined 2,000 years ago the antibiotics and the surgeries and the arthroscopic surgeries and bionics and so many modern marvels that they never could have imagined. Still, we can't save everybody. So if you have some kind of internal condition and you're aware of it, you got to take care of your health, because you never know, you could drop dead any moment. God forbid you have one of these things. You have to do everything you can to take care of your health. If you're obese, you should lose weight. You should check your blood sugar. If you have this, if you have that, whatever it is, you should do the best you can for your health. And if you have one of these conditions that are considered dangerous, so make sure that your affairs are in order, that you've provided for your family, for your loved ones, etc. Childbirth is always dangerous. Much less dangerous now than 2,000 years ago when these sages were operating. We're speaking and giving their rulings. Much less dangerous now than then, thank God. But even so, when a woman goes into childbirth, that's a time for prayer and for taking care of her and supporting her and making sure she has everything that she needs. And this one was a little surprising, one I didn't remember seeing so often, because the sages often talk about medical conditions. But edema, right? Edema. So like swelling in a limb, like unnatural swelling, meaning that something is restricting blood flow. And like in an arm or in a leg, you get extreme swelling. Our sages are telling us it's very dangerous. And you really have to take care of that. And in fact, I got to say, there's a situation in my family where someone has an edema. And we're aware of it, and we're all praying that everything is going to be okay, because when somebody has an edema, it can be caused by a blood clot, and part of that clot can break off, go up into the lungs or the heart, and cause death. So these, any kind of condition like that is dangerous, take it seriously. Our sages are going to over and over and over again say you must protect your health. One of the wonderful Jewish ways that applies to anybody for looking at why it's a holy obligation to take care of your health is because if you die young, think of all the good deeds you could have done with those years of which you robbed yourself. So anything that is in your power to extend your own life, you got to do it. Okay. Then just finally so those are nice, beautiful general teachings, but just to get back to the Mishna, one very quick thing. So we were talking about one who's forced out of his Sabbath boundary. What is he going to do? So one who is forced out, he has to sit, right, in his 4 cubits. He can't, walk back into his boundary, even though he was taken against his will. However, when you're sitting in your 4 cubits, the question is asked, what if you have to go to the bathroom? Are you supposed to just go where you are in your 4 cubits? And the sages say, no. Great is human dignity. We would never make a person, because of some, ritual law, come to soil themselves. So if a person has to go to the bathroom, he can leave his 4 cubits and go to the bathroom. And if he's smart, even though he was, forced out against his will to leave his Sabbath boundary, the fact that he has to go to the bathroom, he can, if he can get back within his Sabbath boundary in order to go to the bathroom, then he will have reacquired that boundary, and now he's free to move around within his whole boundary. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's see if you have questions or comments. Purgatory was the word I was looking for before. Thank you. I couldn't remember that word. Caroline Dobson Chavez. Does a broken Eruv affect only that individual? Can it affect a group within the same location? Wonderful question. So the answer would be like whoever's relying on that Eruv, if something happens to the Eruv, they're going to have a problem, right? Now, there's certain, as we saw, when we talk about a broken Eruv, what we're talking about, here we're talking about somebody's removed, the person is removed from their Eruv. So so that won't affect other people who are relying on that same Eruv because they're still within it, right? So if they said, well, I established my dwelling in that basket of food, like we're joining in it as partners, one person got taken out, the other person's still in that boundary, presumably they can still move around, they didn't get forced out. They don't have to deal with that issue. When we talk about community Eruvs, it's a different question, like is the Eruv active or not? Did something break in the Eruv? But as we've seen, it usually depends on the status of the Eruv at sunset on Friday. Is the Eruv intact, and then it's going to be good for the rest of the time. But that's more the Eruv about carrying within the enclosure. This one about how far you can walk, that's very much individualized. People can join in that same Eruv so that they all have that same Sabbath boundary. Or as we saw the example of the 4 rabbis who were on a ship, they have the same status. They rule differently on themselves, but they establish their Eruv with their feet, right? Their position when Shabbos came in is what established their dwelling. They don't have any other dwelling, right? They're travelers. So it's where they were when Shabbos started. And then if they got removed from that boundary, then they would have an issue, but it would be by individual. Jeff Griffith is with us for the first time. Welcome, Jeff. It's great to have you in the community. I hope you're enjoying. Rachel Silver, first time from Bournemouth in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Rachel. It's great to have you guys with us. Sharon Fran Brooks, if one is forced out of their dwelling due to natural disaster, is that considered in this formulation? Now, that's such a good question, especially as we're having all these fires and floods and hurricanes. So if you're forced out during Shabbos, what is the result? So interestingly, that might be getting addressed by this question of the evil spirit. And let me see, there was a note for this. An evil spirit, a ruach ra'ah, right? So a spirit that is evil. This word ruach is being translated as an evil spirit, and that's the way it's intended. However, ruach also means wind. Some commentaries explain that the Hebrew phrase ruach ra'ah literally as an evil wind, meaning that the person was forced out of his Shabbat limit by tempestuous storm wind. The Rambam, Maimonides, in his commentary on the Mishnah, explains that any coercive force is called an evil spirit. So according to this understanding, what a great question, Sharon, anything that forces you out, it was against your will. And you can almost see like this category of the idolaters is the same thing. It's just anything that forced you out. What difference does it make if it's a human agency or not? It wasn't your choice, right? So it wasn't your choice, but now you're stuck, right? So unless that same coercive force that took you out puts you back in, you're just going to have to wait it out until Shabbos ends in your immediate area. But as we saw, if you have like real physical needs, you can leave that immediate area because human dignity is so great. Kimberly Blank, isn't temptation in and of itself an evil spirit? Yeah, that's what we're talking about, the evil inclination, right? The evil inclination, your soul doesn't have an evil inclination. Your body has an evil inclination, right? So that's why we say it's a kind of bodily desires. But yes, exactly. We can say that the temptation is an evil spirit, but it's not the only kind of evil spirit. That's a different way to interpret what a Ruach Ra'ah is. And Lynn in Texas said, so glad to see the topic of the latrine return, so one can go beyond the 4 cubits for privacy. And if it results in a return to the Sabbath boundary, the Techum, good for him. What makes for a private area? I think it's good that they're not so careful to define what is a private area. So since it's not defined so carefully, at least not here, it would seem to be left to the common sense of the person who has that need. And remember, what are we talking about here? Who is going to bother to restrict himself to the spot where he ended up after he was forced out of his Sabbath boundary? The whole concept of the Sabbath boundary, this only applies to pious people, right? We're not building physical boundaries here. So it's a pious person who's trying to remain with his Sabbath boundary. It's a pious person who says, I don't know why this happened. I didn't choose it. For some reason, I was forced outside of my Sabbath boundary. Okay, so the sages said, now I'm stuck where I am. So I'm going to stay here and I'm going to see what happens. So often in my own life, I have seen this, where the law, following the law, being an observant Jew, being pious, being stringent with yourself, puts you in an odd position that you wouldn't have been in otherwise. You're in a hotel, you're not going to be able to open and close that hotel door without a light going on, so you're going to arrange that the door can be opened without, using the card key or something like that, or you're not going to be able to go through electric doors because, you're causing electricity. And so you're going to make alternative arrangements, some kind of alternative arrangement, or you're going to try to stay in somebody's house so that you don't have to deal with the problems of a hotel and Shabbos. And you end up meeting a Jew that you never would have met, or you end up meeting a non-Jew that you never would have met and who wants to help you out and help you navigate that situation. And it's like, because we accepted that stringency on ourselves, beautiful moments and even relationships are born of that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so that's why I think our takeaway for today is what I said earlier. There is no greater freedom than submitting to the will of God. And that's exactly what we talk about on Rosh Hashanah, making God our king. But it's an idea that just sounds intellectual and kind of like the ego kind of even rejects that idea. No, I don't want to submit to some invisible God. But when you actually start doing it in your life and see what it leads and how it works, then you say, yeah, it's real. It's real. As Bob Dylan said, you got to serve somebody. And when you serve your creator, you'll see that you've never been more free in all your life. That's what I got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific on Monday. May God bless you and all your loved ones with not only a good year, but a sweet year.